Everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on building n8n workflows with n8n. My name is Ophir Prusak from the product marketing team. Really excited to have you all here. I've already seen the webinar, so I know it's going to be an awesome one. So without further ado, I'm just going to pass it on to Sim Superville, who is the product manager for the MCP server, and will be talking us through this. Hey, Sam, how's it going?
Hey, everyone. Thanks for dialing in. Yeah, going well. Looking forward to it.
You ready?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay.
Eduardo put into the chat, I hope this will be game-changing, and I believe it will be. So let's get started. I'm just going to open up my screen now, and then we can kick off. Cool. So yeah, I'm Sim. I'm a product manager here at n8n, and I'm looking after the MCP team with a few other people as well, which I'll share at the end, but let's get straight in. So you may be thinking, oh, like I'm using all of these different tools and I'm also using n8n, but like how do they really work together? Like I can use Claude for some things, but n8n for other things, but like what do I do? What if I told you that there was a way you could use them both together to make each one of them better than they would be individually? And that's where the MCP comes in. So on the menu for today's session, I'll go through what the MCP is, how you can get set up, how you can use the MCP, as well as best practices from the team, just so you can get the most out of it, some tips and tricks, my favorite curated set, and then some time for Q&A at the end. Also, pre-warning, there will be a lot of memes in this presentation because, I don't know, I just like to keep things moving quickly. I'm also going to try and keep it a bit interactive. So what we have here is a Slido. So if you have your phone to hand, or if not, you can open it up in a different tab. You can join at slido.com. You can put this code in on the left here. And I'd love to know what best describes your setup at the moment, just so I can kind of cater this webinar a bit better to what your preferences are. So if you scan that code and have a look, pick the option that works best for you, and then we can see what the results are. So I'll just give that a few minutes, or not a few minutes, a few seconds. I can see people are already starting to vote, so let me try and open up the results screen. Okay. Nice to see some people already connected. That's good. Also, no problem if some people have never used n8n. I'll give a very, very brief overview as to what you can get out of it, and hopefully by the end of the webinar, we'll have convinced you to sign up and create an account. Good to see as well. We have, okay, so it's like watching a race of some sort. Who's going to win? Just leave it for a few more seconds. We will carry on. Okay, so it looks like a bit of a split, really. I was hoping to have one clear winner, but it's interesting. Cool. We've got a good mix. So people have used them separately. They may have already used the MCP and also have never used n8n as well. So, which is good. We'll be able to touch on those different bits together in this webinar. I'm going to start by appreciating that you're probably doing a lot of things at the moment, and I'm competing for your time. So I'm just going to give a very quick, like amuse-bouche of what the MCP is, just for those that don't know what n8n is or don't know what the MCP is, you know if it's worth sticking around, and I believe it is. So essentially, imagine that you're within Claude and you want to create an automation for something. Maybe you want to link, I don't know, a particular web form to a spreadsheet in this example. You can just write it down in text. You can use speech to text and just brain dump it, which is how I tend to do it. And then Claude will probably ask you some questions just to kind of pull out the best version of that workflow. That will go through, and then bam, you will build a live n8n workflow directly in Claude desktop. So it will create this workflow in n8n. It will link it to you. You'll be able to then see it in the browser view, which is a new feature they just released. So this is the actual n8n canvas. And then you can then make any edits to it directly, or ask the MCP to make the edits for you. For those that don't know n8n and are like looking at this as to what is this strange spaghetti mess, essentially it's different nodes that you can connect together You can put agents within these workflows, and you can say, okay, whenever someone submits a feedback form, save the information in a table, but also use AI to summarize the feedback and send me a Slack message. So you can build these like agentic workflows very easily. And now the AI can help build them for you via the MCP. You can even highlight a particular workflow node or a particular node and say, hey, can you help me out? Like, what does this do? Or can you quickly fix this? So like live on the canvas, you can do that. And then the MCP will be able to tell you exactly what it does. You can also ask the MCP to say, hey, can you just trigger this workflow for me, create some dummy text and do it for me? And it will write it in Claude and then ping it across through the actual workflow, which you'll be able to see in the executions. Apologies that it's a bit cramped, but I had to try and throw it up, but hopefully you can see that okay. But yeah, let's go into the actual nitty gritty, and I'll come back as to how you can get that working yourself. So as I mentioned, n8n is a great way to build agentic workflows as well as deterministic workflows that don't need any AI as part of those different steps. Whereas Claude is more of like a chat-based interface that you can interact with to create documents, or I don't know, use it to come up with icebreaker questions like what I did here. There is also the AI assistant that we have released recently, which if you haven't seen, I would recommend having a play with, which is kind of like them combined together, but within n8n itself. But for the sake of this webinar, I'm just going to be focusing on the MCP, which is slightly...
Hey, Sim, sorry to interrupt real quick. A few people have said that it's hard for them to hear. I don't know in terms of audio, so maybe your outside voice. I'll see if I can get the audio as well.
I'm going to move. No problem. Do you know if this is any better? I've moved the microphone
a little closer.
Yeah.
Sounds a little better. Okay.
Cool. All right. I'll try not to give you my breathing noises, but hopefully this audio is a bit better.
Okay.
And I'll use my outside voice. Okay. Yeah. So moving on. So yeah, in terms of what you can do within Claude Code and within n8n, Claude Code is typically better for one-off things, like creating a new document, for example, whereas n8n works really well for reoccurring things. So you want to create a document every day based on a review of what's going on a particular newsletter, for example. You can also, with Claude Code, be maybe a bit more hands-on and do things in iterations, whereas with n8n, you're able to just let it run and be hands-off with it. With Claude Code, it's a bit of a black box, so you might not know kind of what's going on under the kind of water level. You might be able to see, okay, here are some particular tools and such, but with n8n, you get high visibility into exactly what is working. With the MCP, you kind of bring these two together into a union, and you get the best of both worlds. So you can just say, hey, build me an automation that does something. It will go use the MCP, build it in n8n, and then you can see, you'll get the output. You get the email to go and touch grass. But what actually is the MCP? So what it used to be was just the ability to execute the workflow from Claude and n8n. But what we have built out are a bunch of different tools. And each of these tools is kind of like, I don't know, it's an ability for Claude to be able to say, okay, I want to create a workflow. I'm going to use this tool, like use this hammer, or I want to use a screwdriver and update the workflow, or I don't know, I'm going to run out of tool names, but you get my point. It can use these tools to do things directly within n8n. So rather than you having to go into n8n directly, you can just do it from Claude. Also, as I said at the start, you can use other different tools, but for the sake of this demo and webinar, I'm going to just be referring to Claude because that's the one that we've seen people have the most success with. Some other important things to mention are that the agent, when it uses the MCP, will inherit the same permissions that the user has. And so what I mean by that, if a user only has read-only access to a workflow and you connect the MCP, the agent will also only have read-only access to that workflow. So it doesn't bypass the permissions that you've already got set. As well, it's important to note that the workflow access is opt-in. So if you have existing workflows and you want to give them access to the MCP so that Claude can look at them, you have to opt in, but I'll show you how to do that. As I said, it's not just Claude. There's lots of different clients that you can connect through, be it ChatGPT, VS Code, pick whichever one works best for you. You can use the MCP to connect to n8n, and then through n8n, you get access to a host of different software and tools and lovely good things that you can build automations with. So yeah, it's not just the ones that I mentioned, but you can use many more. I'm going to go through this webinar in kind of 3 different stages. Like, first is how you can get set up, and then how you can build workflows, and then how you can manage workflows. And throughout, I'll be sprinkling some tips and tricks for the team, but I've saved the best ones to last, so it's worth sticking around for those. But before I get in, I'd love to hear from you all. Which AI tools are you using at the moment? This will also help when I show you how to set up the MCP, the different ways that you can do it depending on which tool that you're using. So while I stop for breath and take a little drink, have a quick look at that and submit your responses. See, someone was quick to go in. Okay, we got 4. Nice. Also, I hope that the audio is a bit better, but do just ping me if it drops off again. Okay, so it looks like most people are using ChatGPT. Claude is coming up close. Oh, is it overtaking? Oh no. Honestly, this is quite entertaining. I'm enjoying this. Cool. So it looks like ChatGPT, Claude are the kind of 2 front runners, and then you also have Gemini and Claude Code as well. Interesting to see that some people are using Codex, Hermes, OpenClaw, Copilot, and Cursor. So yeah, you can connect the MCP to all of these, and I'm going to show you how. So within your settings page in n8n, all you need to do is go to the instance level MCP. You'll see this new settings page if you're on version 2.33 or later, and then there'll be a nice easy connect to MCP button. When you've connected your workflows, and so don't worry if that was too quick, I'm going to do a live demo in a second to show you how as well. But when you've connected your workflows, sorry, your instance to the MCP, you're going to need to give access to any workflows that you already have. There's a few ways you can do this. You can either do it directly at the workflow level. So you can just click on the 3-dot menu, say enable MCP access. But if you've got loads of workflows, that's going to be quite a lot of work. So we also added the ability to add it on the folder level. So if you have folders, you can go to the 3-dot menu, again, enable MCP access, or at the project level as well. So you can also come up to the 3-dot menu at the top here, say, okay, here, manage MCP access and enable MCP access. So we know that if there's lots of workflows, it's probably easier to just enable them en masse, and then you can disable the individual workflows you don't want the MCP to be able to touch. But yeah, I promised a live demo, and so we're going to jump right in. Hopefully there's no bugs, but let's see. So I'm just going to zoom in slightly. Okay, cool. So this is like my dummy test instance of n8n. And as I mentioned, all you need to do is go into the settings page, open up the instance MCP, and you should see this if you haven't enabled it already. You can then click enable MCP access, and this takes us to the screen that I mentioned before. All you need to do to connect your client to MCP is just click on this connect button, and you get a nice one-click connect for Claude. But you can also connect to any of these other options as well. I'm going to show you as well, if you want to do it manually and not via the one-click, how you can use this URL to do it. But the easiest way is to just click this. I'm going to click that now, and you're going to see what happens. So it takes you to Claude, and boom, it opens up the connector in your skills directory. All you need to do here is just click connect, and it's going to reconnect into the browser, which hopefully won't take too long. And we can see here, if I zoom in slightly, that it lets you define what level of permission you want the MCP to have in that instance. Do you want it to just be able to read, or do you want it to have custom permissions? So you can say, oh, I want it to do everything, but I don't want it to be able to create new workflows, or I don't want it to be able to execute workflows. So you can do that as well. You can just double check this URL is correct, and then say, I recognize and trust the URL, and it will say success, and then bring you back into Claude. And so you'll be able to see in the Customize tab under the connectors that my n8n MCP is now connected, which is great. If you want to connect to other tools, like ChatGPT was the second most popular one, all you need to do is go to ChatGPT, copy this URL, navigate over into your ChatGPT App Store, I'll zoom in again, and go to plugins. You can click on this plus icon here. Just a note, if you're on an enterprise plan, you may not see that plus icon unless you're on the developer level permissions. So you can ask your admin to add you for that. What this does is it lets you set up a MCP by yourself. So all you need to do is in this box here where it shows connection, just paste in that URL that you copied from here. And you can just say, you can name it whatever you want, like Sims custom tool, Sims tool, and then a description, and then click create. And that will then go through the same approach of opening it up in your MCP, in your n8n instance. You can sign in there and it will do just the same. I'm just going to quickly allow access, and then we'll jump back into the settings page. And so what you can see, if I refresh my page now, it's still loading. Okay, I won't wait for that, but you can see that at the bottom here, it will show you your connected clients. You can open that up, and then you can see, okay, there is the ChatGPT one that I've just connected as well. Cool. Let's jump back into the slides. I'm glad that kind of didn't go wrong, but I don't want to jinx myself just yet. Moving on now to the build stage. So as I said, the MCP can help you with basically every aspect of n8n. We've done a lot of work to try and give you as much control as you can. That includes things like debugging, improving workflows, documenting workflows, and I'll show you some of those best practices later. We've added recently the ability to have custom and community nodes, to do surgical workflow edits, had a settings page, use tags, credential assignment, access workflow settings, adding the new or soon to be revealed standalone agents, the error workflows, auto naming versions. So, before when you create a new version and it's say version number 83761, now when you create a new version with MCP, it will give you a detailed description for you, which is a nice little quality of life win. The best practices tool, which tells it how to build it in the best possible way, and then accessing workflow versions as well. So you might be tempted to come in and say, hey, Claude, build me this magnificent workflow, super complicated. What I would recommend if you're getting started with MCP or just using MCP in general is to just start small, because as Uncle Ben said, with great power comes great token use. And especially if you're using the more powerful models, it can be quite expensive to just come in and build a massive workflow straight off the bat. Although it can do that, it just may cost you a few tokens. So what I recommend doing is just starting off small with one individual workflow, because that'll be faster, it'll be cheaper, and more likely to work first time. You can then, as you go through, just use the MCP to update that existing workflow and then build it out further and further. And a nice little tip is that you can actually ask Claude, like, how do I improve this workflow? Because it has access to our best practices tool, it will know what the best way is to build a workflow. And so it will help you, guide you through that as well. Which brings us to our top tips. And just going to quickly check for time. Okay. You might be wondering, why is there a penguin on my screen? It's a little inside joke, but it's like an MCing penguin, MCP. Yeah, I can't see people's faces, so I don't know if that hit with anyone, but I hope it did. But the first tip is to use plan mode if you can. So if you're on Claude Code or on the clients that let you use plan mode, what I would recommend doing is coming over into Claude Code. At the bottom here, you can change it from accept edits into plan mode. And then now when you ask Claude to build something for you, you can say, please also ask me clarifying questions to help create the best version of the workflow. And so when you say it will build me an automation to touch grass, it'll say, okay, cool. Like, what time of day do you want it to do it? Do you want it to send you an email or a Slack message and things like that? So it'll pull that context out of your brain rather than you have to sit there typing ages, okay, what you want it to do. The next tip is from Liam, who some of you may have seen on some of our other YouTube videos, but he's a senior developer advocate here. And he's built what is essentially a recipe book of how to build the best n8n workflows. And you can connect this directly to the MCP. And so if you go to this link here, and I don't know if you're able to paste it into the chat as well, it will take you to this official skill page, which, as I said before, is essentially a recipe book of how to use the MCP. If you scroll down slightly in that page, you'll see instructions as to how you can install the skills. But honestly, it's quite easy to just copy paste this into Claude or your client and get it to explain it to you. But if in doubt, just look at this and it'll tell you exactly how to enable it. Because trust me when I say, the MCP is powerful enough as it is, but when you give it skills, it is incredibly powerful. On the topic of skills, you can actually also add your own recipes depending on how you work. So the MCP will be able to know, okay, actually, maybe this like I want to make sure that every time I create anything that has an email, it should always use Gmail and not Outlook. I don't know, that's a boring example, but you get the gist. You can tailor it to exactly how you use Claude, because you can bring in all the other contexts of how you use Claude. Like, oh, I always work with this particular client, or if I have an agency, here's how I like do my release notes, for example. You can say, okay, I've got a skill, so every time Claude uses the MCP, it knows what it should be doing. And I'm going to go into the kind of best practice for the MCP, and apologies if I'm just dumping lots of things on you, but you can have a look at the recording afterwards because these are all very useful. When you're building with Claude, it's not just the n8n MCP that you can connect, but also other ones as well. And that gives you special powers that you can't do just yet within n8n. For example, if you're creating a workflow within n8n that has a Google Sheet, if you have the Google Drive MCP connected in Claude, when you're building that workflow, Claude will go off, build the actual Google Sheet alongside the workflow, and then connect those two together for you. So you don't need to go and do that yourself. It does that as part of the workflow. So you get essentially the batteries in version of the workflow. You can also pull information from Gmail. So maybe you're creating an agent that triages the emails that come through. You can tell Claude, look at the past emails I had for the past 30 days and help me create a triage agent that only includes the important ones. So you can do that. You can also use it to double check the output of workflows. So when you're testing something, maybe it's written a document to Notion, you can go and say, Claude, have a look at that document that the workflow has written and tell me that it actually makes sense. Like, does it actually do what it's supposed to? Another thing is that the MCP is able to use data tables. So for those that don't know what a data table is, it's essentially a spreadsheet within n8n, kind of like Excel, but with fewer things that you can do within it. But you can essentially just tell Claude, hey, please store information in a data table. So rather than having to use Google Sheets, you can store it within a data table as well, which is really useful and much easier and quicker to get set up. You can also create error workflows. So one thing I hear sometimes when I speak to users is that they don't know when their workflows break and they have to keep checking them in n8n to see if anything's broken. But we do have functionality for this, which is an error workflow that you can connect as a standalone workflow. And then in your original workflow, you can just say that whenever that workflow fails, it should ping this error workflow. So in this case, if my, I don't know, Google Sheet creating workflow fails, it will ping me a message on Slack that will say, okay, hey, Sim, that workflow failed. That used to be a bit technical to set up, but now with the MCP, all you need to do is just say, please create an error workflow to notify me if this workflow errors. And it will do that. It will create the workflow for you. If you already have one's error workflows already, it will connect them to your existing workflow. The benefit of that is that when you're building with Claude at the moment and things break, it might just say, here's a block of text. Sorry, my mistake, things didn't work. But within n8n, if things don't work, you can see exactly where they didn't work. You can kind of dive in yourself, see what the error is, and then come back to the MCP, point it at that node, and then debug it as well. Then looking at the manage section, and we'll come to the Q&A bit at the end as well. So this might be a little bit small, but if you think I can't see that, so I'm just gonna zoom in a little bit. But anyway, so when you've kind of built your workflows as well, you can also get them to be tested directly via the MCP. And I'll explain a bit more on this later, but essentially you just say, hey, I've got a form, create some dummy data and send it through that workflow just to make sure it works, which is really useful. So you don't have to go and test it out yourself. You can just get Claude to test it for you, which is pretty great. But there's not just that. You can also say, hey, again, too small, but you can also say, hey, I want to actually use Claude as this, like, as the chat element. So I can say, I want to maybe create a document or speak with this particular agent. And rather than you having to open up a chat, you can just chat with Claude. It can then trigger that workflow and then bring the information back into your chat, which is, I think, is a really, really interesting use case, because essentially what it means is that you have this like central hub with Claude that you can use for your like, kind of some like work, like creating a document, for example. And then if you want to ping it off into like a particular review workflow, you can just say, okay, cool, use that workflow. And it will take your document, send it off down this workflow. You can say, okay, cool, now I also want you to, I don't know, do the release notes workflow, so you can then let customers know about this. And say, cool, I'm going to go and do this and send it down that release notes workflow. So you essentially get this like orchestration layer where you can see in granularity what's actually happening. So there's no more black box. Claude says, okay, cool, you can just ping this through. It also means that you can use open source models or cheaper models within these steps. So you're not burning up tokens in Claude when you use the MCP. You might use it to do the prompt and like the hard thinking at the start, but then it just sends it down a different workflow depending on what you want to do. So you can also save a lot of money using the MCP at any time. I kind of think of it like Claude is a bit constrained in this sense, but for me, like my main mental model is that if you have this like production workflow and these like really complicated robots are the agents that you have within here, you can kind of constrain them to a set task, and what it's working on can also be reviewed by people. So you're taking this like this beast and you're putting it in a productive workflow that it can then go through and build lots of great, incredible things. Just a quick time check. Cool. So now I'm going to just do a quick demo just to show like here's one I made earlier version of the MCP, so you can see what it looks like actually when it's embedded within. Okay, where is my cool? When it's embedded within Claude. So I'm just going to open that up, and I hope that is big enough. So this is now my actual Claude, and this is the actual n8n canvas within Claude, because as I said, Claude has released recently the ability to open up the browser, and you can see here your actual n8n canvas as if it were open on a website. What I did at the start is I said, hey, please can you create this workflow for a form that creates webinar feedback. I had it in plan mode, so it asked me some clarifying questions. It created a plan. It used some of those tools that I mentioned at the start to figure out how to build it and then to build it. Then asked me a few questions like, hey, I can actually test this workflow for you now that it's been built. So I was like, yes, please. Saves me having to open up that form, test it for me. It did that. It worked well. And then it created the workflow, and I asked it to publish it because it can also do that for me. But it asked me that before it did so. When I open this up within the new Claude desktop, if you're in Claude Code, you can open up this browser and see exactly what it built, which is pretty cool. It gives you explanation as to, okay, how it works, how it verified it, and anything that you need to improve. But you can also do this annotation feature that I alluded to at the start. So in the top right here, you see how it says annotate. You can click on that. You can draw, like, what does this mean? Or you can come down here, get a circle and say, hey, I want to know like what this workflow does. You can then click add to chat and it will add it in here. And you can say, hey, like, please can you explain to me what this workflow does? And then it will then go off and do that. I won't do that now just because it will get confused as I go through. And here, but here you can see one that I made earlier explained what that workflow did based off of that screenshot. It's also really good at updating existing workflows. So I can say, hey, I want to have this webinar form, make sure that it includes a link to the docs as to how to connect to the MCP. And then it will go off and make an edit just to that particular node. It won't edit the whole thing. We've made an update recently that lets it do that. It then did that update. And I said, okay, cool. Now can you like do a test execution for me? As I said before, it can create this dummy data. It tested it for me. It said, okay, cool. Here's the dummy data it made. I could go through and have a look at it. You can also say, hey, come up with a question to ask the chat agent, and it can go through, and it did that as well. So it came up with a question, asked the chat agent, and that's the like orchestration approach that I mentioned before. A little sneak preview of one of the tips and tricks that comes later is that you can also ask Claude to create an HTML page explaining this workflow, and it will build this interactive page for you and open it up directly within the UI for you. So here I've got this skill. So it's one of my custom recipes to make it look like the canvas. And it explains to me, okay, this is what this workflow does. So I use this a lot. If something's really complicated and to get a quick sense check as to how it works, I can come in, it's like fully interactive. And that's all based on this skill that I added, like that secret recipe book as well. So yeah, that's a real life demo. I was gonna do this like super live and like do it, actually show you how it works, but it can take a while sometimes to build, and I didn't want to leave you hanging, so I left it at that. But I'm going to jump back over into my page when I can find it. That is, I've got too many tabs open. Oh. I knew there'd be technical difficulties at some point. Give me 1 second. Come on, you got this. Okay, here we go. Sorry about that. So yeah, so we saw it in action. I had this slide ironically in case there were bugs, just to explain bugs happen, and I thought I was home clear until that very last bit, so apologies for that. At least I could use the slide. Cool, so now in the next few minutes, I'm just gonna go through some of the best tips and tricks that the n8n team themselves use for documenting, for using the MCP. And the first one is from John, one of the senior community engineers here at n8n, and he uses the MCP to create documentation for a workflow. So you might have a complicated workflow and you want to explain to the team what it does. You can just point the MCP at that workflow, point the MCP or the Claude at the n8n MCP, and get it to create this document for you. You also get it to update and like add sticky notes to the workflow as well. My one, as I alluded to before, was being able to create HTML within the Claude UI and use that to explain what an existing workflow does, or share this HTML with people if they need to understand it as well. Svet, which is who's one of the senior engineers in the MCP team, makes a good point that I haven't touched on yet, which is which model should you use for the MCP? We've made it quite token efficient and have done some improvements to that this week, actually. So you can actually use smaller models to be able to use it. Obviously, with bigger models, it may be better for really complicated workflows, but it does work across the range of models as well. The last tip is a crazy one. It's from Rob, who is the staff product designer in the MCP team. And he's built separately, but he's built an agent that we use for some of our user research synthesis called Darwin, and the agent is great. But what he's recently done is use the MCP as a tool within a workflow, which was built by the MCP, to then build more workflows for that agent. So if it wants to build a workflow, for example, to be able to get transcripts from Salesforce or from Gong, it can do that itself. All he has to do is send it a message and say, hey, update yourself and add Salesforce transcripts. I don't know about you, but for me, that's pretty mind-blowing, and it kind of shows the future of this like self-evolving agents. As I said, it wasn't a team effort. Sorry, it wasn't an individual effort. It was a team effort. There's lots of people who've worked on this here at n8n, so I wanted to give them a special shout out. There's Milorad, Svet, Ricardo, Daria. These are the engineers that are in the team. Nikhil, Rob, myself. I've only been here for 3 months, and so before I joined, it was Sinduja, who was the PM on the team, and then Ophir, who you've all met, is the product marketing manager who helped bring this webinar to life. That's it. I feel like I've dumped you with lots of memes, but here's a QR code in case you wanted to go to the links to connect to the MCP server. Hopefully I've convinced you over the course of 35 minutes and that it's worth connecting to. And now we'll have some time for the Q&A session. So I'll get some more water and then Ophir, are you going to jump back in?
Thanks. Thanks a lot, Sim. Wow, yeah, that was a lot to cover. So what we're going to do now is go over some Q&A. If you have any questions, I am checking the chats, but ideally, if you can go to slido.com, put in the number 1776944 and add your questions there. We'll try to get the questions from all the different places. I do have a few questions that I already wrote down during this session that I'm going to start with while people add their own questions. And I'm also adding one of the engineers on the team. Let me just really quick add them in as well. This is Nikhil. Hey, Nikhil. So he's also joining here for some of the questions if we need to get anything which is super technical. So I do want to start with just some questions that I saw a lot come up on the chat. The first one was a few people asked about the local self-hosted version of n8n, specifically does everything which we've been seeing so far, is it supported on the self-host? I mean, I know the answer, but I'll let you answer, Sim. Is everything supported in the self-hosted version, and is there anything people need to know about that?
Yeah, absolutely. You may just need to configure an environment variable, but it is all compatible with the self-hosted version as well.
Awesome. Just a little note, if you are on the self-hosted version of MCP, you might need to make sure that it is accessible. Depending on how you have it set it up in terms of networking, you might need to make sure that it's accessible from your actual AI client. So if it's all just local and it's not, I mean, self-hosted can be in the cloud, self-hosted can be on your computer. There might be some networking stuff which you need to figure out, but yes, it does definitely work. The next question I have here is a few people asked why specifically, or I shouldn't say why, but we've been using Claude Code for all the examples. Is everything you're showing also fully supported in other tools like Codex/ChatGPT?
Yeah, absolutely. Like the MCP itself is the same regardless of which surface or client you choose to use it with. The reason that I do show Claude Code is because it is the easiest to get set up with. Like that one-click connect that you saw works the best with Claude Code. We are looking at adding one-click connect to other clients like ChatGPT and Gemini, for example. But for now, Claude Code is the easiest to get connected. It also has recently released some cool functionality like the browser use, which you may have already seen in tools like Cursor, but it works quite nicely within the Claude ecosystem as well. But my recommendation is just go wherever you're already doing your work, and the MCP will come and meet you there where you are. So it works well for all of them.
Yeah, so that was actually a question. Some people asked about the right-hand side, how to actually see the UI. That is just part of the latest version of Claude Desktop. It does have the built-in browser, so it can take advantage of that. Looking through, the next question somebody asked is that recently the MCP standard has been updated, actually very recently, I want to say, sorry, as of the end of July. Do we have any plans, or what are our thoughts regarding supporting the new MCP standards?
Yeah, absolutely. So you see Ricardo here, he is a wizard and has already gone through and done a lot of the work that we need to be compatible. And so we should be doing a release either next week or the week after that brings us to compatibility, which is like the minimum we need to do. But we're also going to look at exploring what does this new standard give us in additional functionality. So we'll see what else we can add based on that. But yeah, we're fully aware of the standard. It's also worth noting that the standard is not just on our side as the MCP provider, but also on the MCP client side. So Claude Code, ChatGPT, they also need to update how it's used, because we've seen historically, for example, with Claude, they don't support certain versions of MCP apps, which are like little visualizations within the chat. And that's because they just haven't updated the full scope of what's available within the model context protocol.
Great. So the next question, actually, I'm going to take myself. So I see there's a question, what's the difference between working via the MCP compared to the native AI embedded in n8n? So the question here is about what we call our AI assistant, which we recently released a few weeks ago. The short answer is that's a great question. The longer answer is that's a bit beyond the scope of this specific session. Having said that, I will say there's a lot of overlap between what you can do with the two different options. Behind the scenes, they actually share mostly the same code in terms of what they do and how they do it. There are some advantages to both. The highest level thing I can say is from our experience when we got feedback from a lot of our users was that if you're already using a tool like Claude Code or like ChatGPT, and you're already using other MCP servers and you kind of have your own environment, which you want to do the work, then MCP is great. On the other hand, if you're not a heavy MCP server and you do just want to jump right into n8n and you don't want to have to set anything up and you just want it to work out of the box, then the AI assistant, which is inside of n8n, that's great there. They both have their pros and cons. And it's not kind of one versus the other. It's for some people, this might be easier. For some people, the other might be easier. Okay, going through the questions, I see there's a question. Are the MCP settings and connections different between the self-hosted and subscription version? Do you want to answer that, Sim?
Yeah, sure. I think it's like fundamentally the URL that you saw that I copied across when I was using ChatGPT is the same for your instance, regardless of which client that you use. And as we mentioned earlier with self-hosted, there's a few extra steps you've got to go through to be able to enable and connect the MCP. But when you're in that UI, you can do it exactly the same as long as you're on the an up-to-date version of n8n.
Okay. Going through some of the questions. Okay, I'm gonna skip through a few. I'm not quite sure I understand. But okay, here's actually a good question. What's the difference in token usage when building workflows in Claude MCP versus using the n8n user interface or the AI assistant?
Yeah, great question. I use the classic product manager answer of it depends. But in short, when we've done evals that are essentially like tests comparing the performance of our MCP versus the AI assistant that Ophir mentioned earlier, the AI assistant is slightly more efficient in that sense. However, when you're building with the MCP, you can also choose which models you use. You can choose the kind of client that you use within it. You can potentially use open source if you use a client like open code as well. So it kind of puts a bit more of the control on your side. But what I would recommend doing is, if in doubt, just running usage or like any way to look at the usage within your MCP client and seeing just how much the token use is. That kind of gives you a rough idea. That being said, we are doing, as I said this week, some improvements to token efficiency with the MCP. So we'll see that come closer to parity. So you're not constrained by token use on which surface you choose to go with.
Sounds good. The next question, actually, I'm going to take. Somebody asked, can I use the MCP if I only have the free versions of Claude and ChatGPT? So the short answer is you definitely can. You don't need to be a paid user. What I will say, and this is something where there's no right or wrong answer, but the more powerful models can definitely handle more complex, let's say, use cases or more complex workflows. If you just have a very simple workflow, you can definitely use the cheaper / free models and it will work. I found if you're doing really complex and advanced type workflows that need a lot of thinking and a lot of kind of control and logic, you definitely want the better models, kind of the latest models of both either Anthropic or OpenAI. So it's kind of, your mileage will vary depending on the models, less than if it's the free version of ChatGPT or Claude. So a few people have asked, I'm just going to put all this in one general thing about security in general. Can you talk a little about how security is addressed when you're using the MCP server. I've seen some different questions in terms of what they can see, what they can't see, what they can do, what they can't do. Can you spend a minute talking a little about the model of security when using an MCP server?
Yeah, for sure. And Nikhil, I'm going to throw this to you in just a second. But before I do, I will say, as I mentioned at the start, you have the ability to set the permissions when you connect the MCP, so you can limit what it can do in that consent screen when you're connecting the MCP to whichever client that you choose. But I appreciate this question probably wants a more granular answer, so I'll pass over to Nikhil as to how we ensure the security.
So whenever we are designing tools on the MCP, we always make sure that we never pass any sensitive information over to the MCP clients. But I see a specific question on the list of credential, and that's the bare minimum exposure that we can do. Because when we see some users, sometimes they have a preference of saying, I don't want MCP to do anything with my credentials. And that's an option they can pick when they give permissions to their MCP client and say, build a workflow, but I'll take care of the credentials. But even if you give full permissions to see the list of your credentials, I believe the area of exposure is still very limited.
Yeah, exactly. It would just kind of say how to use that credential in a workflow, where to connect it, but it won't expose like the raw API token or anything along those lines.
Got it. Quick question, somebody just asked also in YouTube, the /explain workflow skill, is that part of the skills that we shared the link to earlier?
Good question. It's not. It's one that I kind of cooked up myself when I was onboarding into n8n. I'm very happy to share it. I can maybe put it on GitHub, and I don't know, Ophir, you can tell me what the best way to share it with the community would be. But yeah, it's essentially just a way to say, well, the way that I built it, I said, just look at the n8n repo, like the open source version, pull out the descriptions of how the nodes look and how they work. And then that's all I needed from the UI side. And then I said to Claude, okay, you've got the MCP, you have all the best practices from the best practices tool. Please, can you explain these workflows to me in a way that makes sense? And I then tweaked it based on what I wanted to look at and asked it to create an interactive HTML and then save that within a skill file. And then, yeah, now I can just use that whenever I want. But I will share it. So I don't know the best way to do that, but we will see and try and get it out.
Yeah, we'll figure out. Maybe even add it to the official one. We'll talk to Liam afterwards. Sounds good. A few other questions I'm seeing. So just FYI, there are some more questions regarding using it locally. Again, it's usually a networking thing, even if I'm not going to go into all the details, but it's like if you can see something from the public internet, it will work for sure. If you can't, sometimes it's a little more complicated. A few other questions. Somebody asked about A2A opposed to MCP. I do know internally we have had some discussions about A2A. Anything you want to share, Sim, in terms of what you know for our plans?
For sure. And just for context, A2A here means agent-to-agent communication. So
yeah.
And the MCP is the Model Context Protocol. But from what we've seen, A2A was created by Google and hasn't really been adopted that much across the marketplace or across the different tools that you can use, whereas MCP is becoming the standard in a similar way that API became a standard a couple of years ago. And so it is on our radar, and we're also looking at A2A within n8n, the canvas itself, so the agents within that. But in the sense of connecting n8n to a separate tool, it's not in our roadmap because most of the things you can do with A2A, you can already do with MCP and more, and so it's more useful to do the MCP. But we will keep an eye on it. If it blows up, we'll have a look at if we can add that compatibility.
Makes sense. And then somebody asked, and I can just answer this myself, does n8n actually have an API? So yes, we definitely have an API. We actually have two things you should look into. We have our API, which you can go in and just look in our docs. We also launched, I want to say about a month or two ago, a CLI, which I I want to say in some cases going to be even better than an API, just in terms of if you're doing things locally. So by all means, play around with the API or the CLI. As well as the MCP, it's not one or the other. You might want to use both depending on your needs. So one thing I also want to add, just to be clear, and actually, Sim, maybe you should go into a little more detail on this. Regarding the permissions of the MCP itself, I know that the owner, or the n8n kind of owner of the actual instance, has some control over it opposed to the actual user. So do you want to go into maybe just a little detail in terms of what are the controls of the owner level versus kind of what an individual user can configure?
Yeah, for sure. And so kind of in short, it's very similar to how admins have control over how the API is used within an instance. But what that means is you get full visibility as to who's connected and to which client and with which level of scopes. And if needed, you can revoke that permission as well. So yeah, we've just mimicked what we do for the API.
Sounds good. Here's an interesting question, which I sometimes ask myself the same thing. What level of observability can we do in terms of what the MCP is actually doing? And I'll start by saying, I know we also recently launched OpenTelemetry, which gives some information. I don't know how much for the MCP side, but I am kind of curious, if you are using MCP, what level of observability do we have in terms of what it's actually doing?
Yeah, and just from my own understanding, is this like observability within an individual session, or like top level observability across multiple? I can answer both. Maybe it's the best option.
I'm not sure. Why don't we just answer both?
Yeah, sure. So I'll start with the last one, and that's like overall like usage of it. And we're in the process of releasing. We have recently released the ability to get usage logging. So if you're on, I believe, one of the enterprise plan, you should be able to get a view as to the logs that are happening from MCP calls across your instance. But we also have, like, if you're within Claude yourself, you'll be able to see all the different tool calls that are happening, and you'll be able to open those up and export them, or look at what specific work the MCP is doing. We actually have a skill set to be able to pull out details from a chat so that we can use it for debugging. And so if you're interested in that, you can also set up a skill to help make that a bit easier. Also, I don't know, Nikhil, if you have anything to add to that, but that was my top level.
Yeah, I'd also like to add, there is a different angle to observability. So you can use MCP to observe your own workflows. So let's say you have a workflow which has been failing, and you could just ask MCP to take a look at the last n executions, see what is going wrong. And MCP is quite fast at pulling all the execution logs and giving you a rundown on what went wrong, and even suggesting ways on how to fix it. So this is also a very common use case on how we use this MCP internally. When you see a workflow failing, we take the lazy route and we ask MCP to go ahead and fix it for us. And it gets it right almost every time.
Makes sense. Makes sense. There's some more questions that talk specifically about really large and complex workflows. So I want to kind of just group this maybe into one kind of mega question, because they talk about different things. I'll start by just saying my own personal experience, but I'd love to hear your experience, Sim, and your experience, Nicole, as well. When we talk about large workflows, what I found is it does depend a lot on the model when you're using the MCP, because ultimately, behind the scenes, what's happening, and something which we didn't get into for the techies out there, is that on the Claude Code or whatever IDE you're using, it's actually creating a TypeScript representation of the workflow. So the way it works behind the scenes is, even though the workflow itself on the n8n side is represented in JSON, what we found is that in order to get basically better results, is we use a TypeScript representation of the workflow. And as you all know, LLMs are really, really good when it comes to code. So once it has a good representation, then it sends in information over through the MCP to the n8n instance, and then it'll create the workflow. So the question of how complex you can get depends a lot on the model itself, what the context window of the model, how good the model itself is. And I would make the case that I have not run into any specific issues where a workflow got too big or too complex in terms of what it could handle. Having said that, maybe I'm only looking at workflows with like 30, 40 nodes tops. If you have a workflow which has more than that, I would even make the case that maybe you should probably break that into like multiple workflows with either sub workflows or things happening in the orchestration. But I haven't run into any specific issues with that. And I'll even go a step further in saying I've had success in having Claude Code actually take a big workflow and chunk it up into 2 smaller ones. So yes, it's definitely something it can do. You can say, hey, this workflow is getting out of hand. Can you help me break it down? Again, it depends a lot on the model. I use Opus 4.8 for a lot of my stuff. I'm very fortunate that I can use that for all my stuff. I know, it depends on how much tokens you have. But that's been my specific experience. What about you, Sim?
Yeah, just to echo a lot of the things that you say, I think it's kind of a better question that if it gets huge and massive, you probably need to break it up a little bit into sub workflows just to make it a bit easier, not only on the MCP, but on the efficiency of the workflows being run. And it's also easier to debug if anything goes wrong. As I mentioned, the benefit with the MCP is you can ask it to do it for you as well. So it's definitely easier. I will say as well that what you can do with the new browser use tool in Claude Code or any other browsers is you can direct it towards specific nodes if you want to make really surgical updates, and it will then know what to look for. We have a particular tool which gets the details from our workflow when it is debugging, and we're adding the ability to, when you do make version changes to that workflow, that it can look at the difference between those changes. So rather than having to look through the entire workflow, it will just look at what changed, and that should also make it a bit more efficient when working with larger workflows. But yeah, I also do all the things that you said as well, Ophir, so I don't want to replicate those. But Nikhil, do you have anything else to add?
No, just to add on to what you said, a lot of work is going on to make the communication between the MCP client and the server as optimized as possible, and that would show up to the users in many ways: faster response times and lesser tokens being used. I think quite recently we added a feature where we can do surgical updates on workflows so that the whole workflow is not recreated when we want to make a change. So changes are always happening, updates are coming, so keep an eye out.
Yeah. In the last 2 minutes, I do want to go over a few questions that people have asked, which are not MCP related, but just since we know we have a lot of different people who are viewing this webinar, regarding is n8n free, is it not free, et cetera, et cetera. So to be clear, n8n has a few different versions. We have what we call our free community self-hosted version. You can go to GitHub, you can download n8n, you can run it on your own computer, you can run it in the cloud wherever you want. That's the free community version. And we have tens of thousands of people who are using the free community version, either locally on their computer or self-hosted wherever they want. We also do have our n8n cloud, which if you go to n8n.io, you can sign up for a cloud account. It does come with a free 2-week trial to play around with. And then after the 2 weeks, if you want, you can subscribe. We have different subscription levels. And then we have n8n Enterprise, which if you are a larger entity with thousands of people, I want to say currently over a third of the Fortune 500 uses n8n. So we definitely have a lot of enterprise clients. And if your needs are more enterprisey, we have that version as well. So there's a lot of different versions. Regarding the MCP works on every single version of n8n, regardless of if it's self-hosted or cloud or enterprise. It's the same MCP. You can use it everywhere. So we have reached our time. If you haven't yet, I definitely suggest you go to n8n.io and sign up for a free trial account. Thank you so much, Sim and Nikhil. And for everybody who's watching, this will be on our YouTube channel shortly, since this currently is also being streamed to YouTube Live, where anybody can watch it if you are currently watching in other channels. So again, thanks everybody, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks everyone.